Now, if you're a golfer who's trying to add a lot of wrist hinge and you're obsessing about this movement, I urge you to stop obsessing about your wrist hinge, because if you overdo it, it can absolutely destroy your golf swing. So in this video, we're going to get into why it can be so damaging, overdoing your wrist hinge, but also what you need to focus on in regards to your wrist hinge. So I'm Jonathan Chown with JChownGolf. Let's dive right into it. So let's get straight into it on why overdoing your wrist hinge can absolutely destroy your golf swing. Because if you are really trying to get a lot of wrist hinge, maybe a lot of it really early as well in your backswing, that will create a little bit too much of a cupping in your lead wrist here. Because if I'm just trying to vertically hinge my wrists up here, really trying to get all that wrist hinge I possibly can, there's most likely going to be a cup that will be formed in that lead wrist. So if we have a cupped lead wrist in our golf swing, we're going to see, one, that club face open if we've got a standard grip, and two, when that lead wrist is very cupped, that club face or that club shaft here is going to be moving very steep. So you're going to have a steep shaft and an open club face. Not a good combination there. So another reason to why you don't want to obsess about that, over hinging that wrist there, is because you will have a very narrow backswing to where you have pretty much no distance between your shaft and your body here. So when we have a very narrow backswing, that's going to make it difficult for us to get the club back onto the golf ball in the downswing. Because if I stay in my posture with a very narrow position here with a lot of wrist hinge, let's say moving in the downswing, if I stay in my posture, turn through the golf ball nicely, my club's going to be very elevated off the ground. Because the narrower I get, the more I'm pulling my hands. The hands are getting closer to my body here. So what's going to happen for quite a lot of golfers with this really narrow swing created by a lot of wrist hinge? They're going to have to drop their trail side down quite early to be able to get onto the ground and get onto the golf ball, because there's no other way that they can really hit that golf ball from there. So that will cause you to really get to a point where you'll be stopping your rotation, flipping your hands through there, but ultimately losing all control of club face and strike. Because if I'm dropping that trail shoulder down early, I'm probably going to be hitting that low point early, because you can see when the trail shoulder drops, I'm now going to be hitting the ground very early because my upper body has dropped back. So cup left wrist from overdoing that wrist hinge, and very narrow backswing. We don't want either of them because of what's going to happen in the downswing. Open club face, deep shaft in the downswing, that's not what we want. And then we have to do a lot of this side bending. So there's a couple of things we need to do to be able to have a better wrist hinge, because of course we still need to hinge the wrists in the golf swing, because it creates another lever in the golf swing, which will then create a little bit more club head speed coming through the golf ball. So we don't want to be completely straight, with our wrists. That's going to cause a whole host of other problems. But we want to there's no benefit to overdoing it at all. But I know a lot of golfers out there who are consciously trying to get as much wrist hinge as possible. I've heard students say as well, when I've asked them what they're working on, they say, I'm really working on getting as much wrist hinge as I possibly can. Will destroy your game massively. So there's really two ways to really fix this problem and get it happening naturally. And there's a good drill we can do for this as well. So one, we need to target a little bit of how we are holding that golf club. Now, a lot of good players out there are not thinking one bit about their wrist hinge, not at all. I think probably vast majority of top players out there, unless they have a problem with their wrist hinge, they don't think about it at all. And I think for myself as well, as a coach, I don't think about my wrist hinge one bit, but I do it in my golf swing. It does happen. And even through my development years, I never worked on my wrist hinge. Because one, if you've got a nice loose grip pressure, you're not strangling the life out of that golf club. So you're gripping that club on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very light, 10 being, strangle it to death. I am holding it at about a 3 out of 10. So my hands are really quite nice and loose here. If I'm doing that, having a nice loose grip pressure, and if I'm trying to get quite nice and wide in my takeaway, my wrist hinge will, one, naturally happen as I'm getting to about shaft parallel to the ground here. You just grip a golf club and you hold it really loose, and you're trying to get wide in your takeaway. So narrow is, where the club gets quite close to us. Wide is when the club gets further away. Obviously continue to turn your body whilst you do that. That club is going to naturally hinge at around left arm parallel to the ground. So If you're doing that, you will never have to think about your wrist hinge. So I could hit a ball here. I'm not even going to think one bit about my wrist hinge. Nice loose grip pressure, and I'm going to really have a nice wide takeaway. And you're going to see I've got wrist hinge. Wasn't trying one bit, but okay, we can do that. So, but we also want to make sure that we are keeping our wrist angles whilst we're doing it as well. Because as we said, with a lot of players, when they do their wrist hinge wrong and they try to overdo it a little bit, they create a little bit of a cupping in their lead wrist too. So if we can think, okay, I want that nice loose grip pressure to where I don't have to think about my wrist hinge, it will happen naturally and be quite nice and wide, which is combating a little bit of one of the faults a lot of wrist hinge can do. We need to combat that other fault a little bit to be doing exactly what we need to do to get good quality wrist hinge, and that is keeping a flat lead wrist when we're doing this. Because if I can keep a flat lead wrist when I am having that point where my wrists will naturally hinge around left arm parallel, now I'm going to have a stable club face. My club's going to be moving a little bit shallower. It's not going to be getting steep. I'm going to be swinging the club a lot better. So what we do, we grab a tee, we pull our tee into the front side of our glove here. So this is really, really going to help you keep a better quality wrist hinge. Nice loose grip pressure, 3 out of 10. Nice wide takeaway. And then really just feeling like this tee here is not jabbing into my forearm. Because if it jabs into my forearm, you know, then I'm cupping that left wrist. So if I'm going to overdo that wrist hinge, vertically hinge it and hinge it early, that's going to jab into my forearm. I'm going to feel some pain there because a cup will be created too. So nice and loose with those hands, wide takeaway, feeling like this, you know, the tee there isn't jabbing into my forearm. That's going to then, okay, I'm going to have good wrist hinge. I'm not going to be cupping my lead wrist. I'm going to be nice and wide. I'm going to be hitting a nice, good shot there. So you'll one feel, okay, straight away, you'll see some wrist hinge happen and good wrist hinge. And two, you'll feel like your swing's way more fluid, way more kind of rhythmical, I can guess you could say, because that light grip pressure will really help you with a tremendous amount of other things in there. You'll actually start to see the ball go a little bit further because you'll be making the most out of your wrist hinge as well, and most likely straighter because you'll be having that flat lead wrist there. But let's say, okay, you still do want to work on manually getting your wrist hinge. It's an area that you just want to practice. Okay, we can do something for that. We can get ourselves to left arm parallel to the ground. Nice loose grip pressure. We can stop here if we want to, have a nice flat left wrist here. That's what we want. And we want to be nice and wide in our takeaway. So we can get to that position, left arm parallel, nice wrist hinge. So you can almost think of kind of like a little L position here. You might have all heard of that before. Stopping, making sure, yep, you've got that wrist angle, flat left wrist, nice grip pressure, club wide, swing up, swing through. That's how you can work on your wrist hinge properly if you really, really do want to work on it. As I know, it's an area lots of golfers really do want to work on. But from a golf coach's perspective, unless you've got a massive problem with your wrist hinge, it's something you don't need to massively, massively worry about. But if you really do want to, of course you can do it. So again, yep, everything's looking good there. Swing up, swing through there. And if you want, you could do the tee in the glove, doing that at the same time. If you want to be making sure everything's nice and controlled, no cup left wrist, just want to have that physical feedback rather than just visual. Good, swing up, swing through there. So if you're making sure loose grip pressure, 3 out of 10, wide takeaway, and making sure your left wrist is flat, you're going to be doing your wrist hinge perfectly. You do not have to really overdo the movement. If that's the biggest thing from this video, stop overdoing your wrist hinge. It will destroy your golf swing. Let it happen naturally with those elements. You'll be playing so much better golf. So if you found this video helpful, click that like button. If you want more golf instruction just like this, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell button too to be notified every time I put out a video. So make sure you follow these little areas and you won't have any problems with your wrist hinge.